So Shannon, if you could please start recording now. Also, we'd like to know who's tuning in this morning and ask that you put your name, organization, if applicable, and email address in the chat. And if you have any questions or comments for the panelists, please put them in the chat box so that if there's time, we can address them with our panelists at the end of the presentation. We have some very amazing special guests today who will be sharing their expertise on the voting process and how to ensure that all people feel safe and competent when voting. Our panelists include Christine Ruther, Child Guidance Board member and Delaware County Councilperson, Scott Alberts, member of the Delaware County Board of Elections, Peggy Braden Wilson of the League of Women Voters, Michael Laws, chair of the PA Dems Black Caucus, and Kristen Traniello, editorial consultant for Every Voice, Every Vote. Thank you, panelists, so much for being here today. Before we get into specific questions, I'd like to ask each panelist to briefly introduce yourselves and give any biographical information that I did not include. So I'm going to start with going left and around on my screen. So I'm going to start with Kristen.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Kristen Trinello. I am the editorial consultant for the Every Voice, Every Vote project, which is a project managed by the Lundfest Institute for Journalism with lead support from the William Penn Foundation. And we started this project ahead of the 2023 municipal elections, where we were helping voters become informed about the mayoral and city council and all of the local elections. And now we are, our next phase has traveled into 2024 and 2025, where our project was able to support 71 media and community organizations with $2 million total among those 71 organizations to support their efforts in local political reporting, as well as community engagement efforts like town halls and voter guides and all the good things that we need to help Philadelphia voters become competent and ready to vote, not just voting in elections, but also being engaged in city council conversations and, you know, all of the different ways, all the different mechanisms of our democracy. We are trying to help Philadelphia communities become really engaged in every possible way. Thank you so much
We're
for having
so
me.
thankful for all of those things that you do. Oh, very needed.
Well, we're
Um,
thankful for everything you all do.
Councilwoman Ruther, we'll turn it over to you.
My name is Christine Ruther. I'm a member of Delaware County Council. I was elected in 2019 and took office in January of 2020 to be sort of immediately confronted with what has been and still is, for those of us who have to respond to lawsuits and things, an extraordinarily traumatic election in 2020 that was made considerably more complicated in Delaware County for three reasons. First, we were introducing new machines. Supposedly in the spring primary, we were meeting then Governor Wolf's directive to have a paper trail. And previous councils had decided to defer implementation until the presidential election year primary. So we were going to be doing that. We were confronted by Act 77, which came into being in November of 2020, I'm sorry, November of 2019, to be implemented in the 2020 presidential primary on a really expedited timeline, but it provided for no excuse mail-in voting for the first time in Pennsylvania. And the third thing reared its head in Delaware County on March 16th of 2020, which was the COVID pandemic, and really substantially, with the shutdowns, limited our ability to educate voters and poll workers about the new machines and the new law. And it was a really challenging year, but I was on point for elections, so it became my problem. And I want to say we got through that. We had a successful election in 2020, and I continue to be the council liaison with elections, but we have really managed to add to our staff, bring in some great professionals. And so I leave a lot of that to some of our fellow panelists who you'll be talking to shortly.
Well, thank you, and we're very thankful for everything that you do. And Peggy,
Hi.
turn to you next.
And I just want to congratulate Christine, because I think that what we've seen over the years is a process of continuous improvement. And I have to say that I'm really grateful for your ability to learn from your mistakes and move on and improve the process. And thank you. I am a board member of the League of Women Voters of Central Delaware County. We are a nonpartisan political organization, and we encourage informed and active participation in government. I am on the Voter Education Committee, and I'm the coordinator of congressional liaison visits. Now, we used to call ourselves the Voter Registration Committee, but what we find when we go out is that everybody's registered, but nobody votes. So our focus is on registration, but also trying to show people why it's in their interest to vote, to make them aware of the deadlines, to help them sign up for mail-in voting. So all of the support activities that go along with voting.
And all of that information, I hope that we're able to share with our viewers today or through links. So thank you so much. All right, I'll turn to Michael.
Yes, my name is Mike Laws. I am the current chair of the statewide Democratic Black Caucus. Our objective is to work with all the different counties throughout Pennsylvania to educate people, demystify what the Democratic, what our goals are. So education, voter education is extremely important to me. I was elected to state committee in 2018. I'm also a political consultant, so I run a lot of political campaigns from Lori Dumas and 2021. Also worked with Jack Stelzheimer this year as one of the senior consultants with him. And currently I'm with Erin McClellan running her campaign. So I look forward to this conversation. It's extremely important. Voting is your voice, but more importantly, it allows you to participate in the process. And my encouragement to Black people that I reach out to, and everybody reach out to, is that it's just not a voice and a vote. You basically have to make sure that you are participating in the process. There's an A process, which is getting elected. There's a B process of what you do when you're there. And my objective is to train people, mayors specifically, on how you make sure that you have representation in the boards and authorities, and you're able to make a real impact, not just vote. So that's what I do. Professionally, I was a professional with Xerox Corporation for many years as an executive. So I understand the sales process, love to sell everything. I think that's extremely important. I'm also a total quality manager, TQM, so Six Sigma and those things also. So that's who I am, and I'm sticking into it.
Thank you, Michael, for everything that you do. And last but not least, I'll turn it over to Scott Alberts.
It would probably help if I unmuted myself. My name is Scott Alberts, as Jennifer so eloquently put it. I am on the Board of Elections of Delaware County, which, quickly, for those of you who don't know, counties are the level of government that administers elections, right? So we have control of all of the voting machines or scanners or ballots, depending on where you live. It could be a different system. In Delaware County, we have a three-person Board of Elections as per our home rule charter. In many counties, that function is served by the three-person Board of Commissioners. But we have a county council, which does not have guaranteed minority representation. So we've created this separate body, and that's where I serve. I'm one of the two Democratic representatives. We serve alongside one Republican representative. Thankfully, the differences between us on the matters relating to overseeing elections, the differences are very small. Board member McBlain can argue about all kinds of things, but when it comes to having a free and fair election that's run efficiently and smoothly, we are in perfect alignment. And that is that is a nice thing in this environment. I like to joke that this is the volunteer position most likely to result in my assassination, but it's not really a joke. We do face threats, and we do face people who wish to disrupt the elections and possibly do people harm. My role is really to rule on the big questions that come before the board. We have an operational team. They do excellent work. I didn't always believe that. And in fact, I don't think it was always exactly true. I came into this because I was an advocate. I was an activist. I was a political consultant and a one-time elected official. And one of the things I kept running into was poorly executed election operations. And I became very, very knowledgeable on the election code for someone who's not an attorney. I'm, in fact, the first non-attorney to serve on the board. My specialty is those election operations. And I think the problems that Christine was describing in 2020, the challenges were very real. I felt them very keenly from the outside looking in. And I let Christine hear it. And I think I let her hear it long enough that she said to the other county council members, we got to get this guy we need to put him to work so he stops complaining and starts solving the problems. And so I think that's been my focus, to make it a better experience for the people who serve on election day, working the tables, greeting the voters, checking them in. It's a very, very difficult job, and we've made it a better job, and we've made them more effective. Trying to make a better experience for the voters, make voting more accessible, make it, as Michael said, to demystify the process and give people more information. We have a long way to go. We have a lot of work to do. I'm not satisfied with every outcome, but we're getting there, and we're making huge improvements. And we really, at this point, have a great staff, and I'm confident we'll have a good election ahead of us. But it's always nerve-wracking when you head into these big elections. So that's going to be my focus for the next couple of months, is making sure that this election happens smoothly and correctly.
If I could just jump in there for 1 minute. I think it's important for people to realize that the folks who run our elections are professionals. They're also human beings, and I am sure all of them have their personal biases. And I can tell you, part of the reason why I got I'll say stuck with being the elections liaison is because I had served in a number of different capacities. I was a judge of elections in my local precinct. Before that, I'd been a clerk. I'd spent years recruiting and helping to train poll workers who worked inside. I'd spent years dealing with the various challenges that you're allowed to bring in elections. I'd actually, at one point, as a candidate, been thrown off the ballot. I'd helped people who'd been thrown off the ballot right in. I'd been through that. And when I was elected in 2019, I was a Democrat who was elected. It was the first time control of the county had shifted since 1875. So that's a very long period of time. And when I went in there, I was convinced that the people who ran the elections departments had their fingers on the scale, and there were people I wanted to walk out as employees and say farewell. And what I found very quickly was, regardless of what their own personal political beliefs were, it was a professional staff, an extraordinarily under-resourced professional staff. And I am proud to say, having gotten to know them and work with them, they are still there. They are still doing a really good job for the county. And I don't believe, and I've been told this by Democrats who were part of what's called, we're going to get in the weeds, but part of a team that goes and audits 2% of the vote at the end of the year and at the end of every election. And I've been told, no, your problem, if there are problems, the problems is with the Board of Elections, which, by the way, is a partisan body set up under state law. But they were exercising the discretion they had under state law, oftentimes to the benefit of their party, which is the whole reason it's a partisan process. It was never the people working on the board in the elections departments. And I have only come to realize over time that is incredibly true, that these people are, irrespective of what their personal beliefs might be, they're not going to jail for anybody. their job is to facilitate elections, and they do it to the best of their ability. And one of the things that Scott and Peggy and I and other people Michael, I'm sure, have dealt with, who've been involved in politics for a long time in Delaware County, who've been unhappy in certain ways in the way that the system operated in the county in prior years, is they were tremendously under-resourced. And that is something that we have really tried to address. And with the advent of, no excuse mail-in voting, which started with the 2020 elections, we've fortunately started with the 2020 elections given the pandemic, but was not a response to the pandemic. We have found people who, we've found alternate sources of funding. The state is now funding some part of the elections, and it's really enabled Delaware County to, I think, meet its obligations to improve its elections operations. But I want to be clear, I have experienced this, and I think Scott would agree with me. We may have challenges from time to time with people. We may disagree with how they want to do things, but I have yet to encounter anybody, certainly anybody in the management ranks of our election department, who's trying to put the fix in. They just want a fair and secure election where everybody who's eligible to vote is given the opportunity to vote, and every vote that is cast is counted.
Thank you. And that's what we want. We want everyone to feel, that their vote matters, that their vote is important. So we have a very amazing group of panelists here today. So I'm just going to put my first question out to anyone who wants to answer it. And, hopefully maybe everyone will chime in a little bit. But, why is it important for everyone to make their voice heard through voting? Why is voting important? Go ahead, Michael.
Okay. Here's something, and I'm sure everybody hears this, but especially in different communities, is that my vote doesn't count. Okay. And so one of the things that I always explain to people is that it counts if you vote. And it's extremely important for you not to complain about the process, because if you don't vote, what's going to happen to you? Think about some of the things that will happen and won't happen. Reality is that there's an entire process, and I think the challenge we ran into is in a long time ago, they stopped teaching civics, teaching people the importance of why it's extremely important to vote. And my objective, and I try to tell everybody, is that, look, if you're going to complain about something, understand that it has an impact on you personally. If you understand, from different levels of government, what they do, what's the difference between city, what's the difference between county, what's the difference between what the state is and also the presidency. So understanding those things will allow you to really understand the importance of voting. And if you don't vote, what can happen to you? From understanding what sewer and some of the expenses it's going to cost from those little things to your water bill. All those things have to do with voting. And so I think it's extremely important. If you don't vote, don't complain. I try to tell people, but of course I try to educate them along.
I want to piggyback on Michael. When I was thinking about this question, I thought of that movie City Slickers, where, Jack Palance and Billy Crystal are riding along, and Jack Palance tells Billy Crystal that the secret of life is one thing. And what that one thing is, you have to figure out for yourself. And it's the same with voting. We can't really tell you why you should vote. You need to think about what things are important to you. Is it the services that your community provides? Is it how your schools are run? Is it the funding for your schools, availability of healthcare and insurance to pay for it, your taxes? You have to figure out for yourself what is going to be your impetus to vote, because those are the things that your vote will impact. And you need to, once you decide what's important to you, you have to find out how the candidates stand on the issues and vote for the ones who best align with you, not a single issue, but overall. And if no one does, run for office yourself. It's your right. And really, it's your responsibility if you don't think that things are being run the way they should be. So that's my shtick.
I saw Kristen's hand up, so I want to go to
Go for it,
Kristen real quick. Yeah.
I love everything that Mike and Peggy just said. And, our for every voice, every vote, during this 2024 and 2025 cycle that we're in, our calls to action are be heard, be engaged, be accountable, and take action. And voting falls into all of those categories. Be heard. This is actually your time when you vote. It's your time to say, these are my values. These are the things that I want done in my communities, right? That's how your voice gets heard in a very concrete way. Be engaged. We live in a democracy, and it's like Peggy said, it's our right and responsibility to be engaged in the democratic process. Be accountable. Again, be accountable to your communities. Just also like what Peggy said about, taking, if you think things should be different, if you think, you could do it better, then you need to, or someone who could do it better, go vote for that person or run for office. Be accountable. Take the responsibility that you have in your communities. And then that runs to the next part, which is just take action, which is what Mike was saying, which is that if don't complain if you don't take action, right? There is, I saw the word apathy in the chat, and I think that there definitely are some people who are apathetic, but I'd also more say that people are kind of cynical, and also like what Mike was saying was that they don't necessarily have the civics information to make the connection about what they really care about. They all care. They're not apathetic about their own lives. They are not apathetic. They care very deeply about things in their own lives, but they haven't been able to make the connection for how to take action and how voting is the action to help change what you want to change in your communities. So, those are that's kind of the way that we've been thinking about it on our project. And those are, 4 ways to think about like why it's so important to go out and vote.
I just wanted to bring 2 things to people's attention about why it's important to vote. And these are very practical things. One of them, I was out talking to people, knocking on doors, and reminding them about the upcoming election. And I had one gentleman say to me, I'm really far more concerned about my own family. I don't really care about all of this stuff. And I said, well, does that include the quality of your schools? Does that include whether you can own your own home and what taxes you pay to stay in your home, or what your rent happens, what happens to your rent when taxes go up? I said, if you care about those things, then you should be voting, because who is in the office will align with your philosophy. If you want low taxes, you may align with one candidate. If you want more services because you've got a special needs child, it may be a different candidate. And you've got to educate yourself about who's going to make a difference on the things that you care about, or as folks said, run yourself. And I think the other thing is, and I say this wearing my hat as a politician and an elected official, I represent everybody in Delaware County. I represent them whether they're old enough to vote, whether they vote for me, whether they vote for the other guy or the other woman. I represent them whether they disagree with me or not, or agree with me. But I will tell you, when somebody calls me with a problem, if they're an active voter, if they're involved in their community, if they're informed about what's going on in the community, if they're civically engaged, it is far easier for me to get them to the right person and to help them understand what I can do or can't do. They're going to get to an answer a lot faster. And not only that, they're going to get people to pick up the phone faster. It's not a question of how much money you donate to a candidate. It's not even a question of whether you're in the same party. I got a call from, at one point in my past life, I was a chair of a local Democratic committee where I live. And I worked with a gentleman who was the chair of the opposing party, the Republican Party. He called me because a neighbor was having difficulty with the medical examiner's office at the county. I knew him. I had his phone number. I took his call on my cell phone. I forwarded it on to our our deputy who's overseeing the medical examiner's office and said, is this something we can help with, or can we at least get back to them? If it's not, maybe it's something we should help with. It was whether the family could get information that they didn't have the money to pay for. So that's what engagement does. It gets you a certain level of access. And that engagement can be at a low level where you just know who these people are because you've been to one of their outreach events or an open house. And engagement doesn't have to mean you're getting politically involved. It means literally you can go to an elected official's open house, you can go to a public meeting, you can be seen, you can know who they are, and it can help you get to places faster. But voting, it starts with voting. It starts with wanting to know about what's going on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I actually came up with two, but Michael stole one of mine. The whole idea about my vote doesn't make a difference. We have a chart that we developed that shows historical elections that have been impacted by very, very few votes. And one of them on there is Bernie Sanders. He won his first election as mayor of Burlington, Vermont by 10 votes. So that's 10 people who didn't say, my vote doesn't count. The second thing is we keep running into people who think that you only vote every 4 years. And that's not true. There are elections every 6 months. In the spring that we vote in the primaries to help the candidates pick the parties pick their candidates. And then in the fall, we pick the candidates who are going to hold office. So every 4 years, even years are for national, state, and county offices like presidents, senators, judges, etc. The odd years are for local or municipal elections like school boards, magistrate, local council members. And these probably have more impact on you as a citizen than the ones that are every 4 years. I mean, how's your township going to be run? How will your schools be run? How much will you pay in local taxes? And local elections are how the parties build their benches for future national, state, and county elections. So it's really important to not just come out every 4 years. Every 6 months, there's an election, and it's your responsibility to be informed and vote.
So I would take it from a different perspective and look at why we vote at all. Why do we have elections? And I think that, when people, particularly Kristen mentioned the folks who are cynical, I think people have a wrong conception about why we vote, right? There's a Prussian general from the 1800s named Clausewitz who once wrote that war is the continuation of politics with other means. And that's a relationship that works two ways, right? The way we live in civilization with other humans is we come up with ways of mediating the conflicts between us, right? You have an interest, I have an interest. These interests are in competition. We have to resolve them somehow. Now we can talk it out and come to a mutual beneficial arrangement one-on-one, but when we get into large groups of people, we need a system. And traditionally that system has been, I have more power of violence than you and I make it happen, right? We've developed this other way of doing it where we decide we're going to vote and the popular will is what matters. And this is the barrier between us and a world ruled by violence. I'm not saying that violence isn't part of people's experience and the world now, but elections are how we avoid rule by violence. And when people are frustrated and they're not getting what they want out of that system, right, they might turn to violence, or they might decide, I'm not going to vote at all. It doesn't matter. Politics is not religion, and voting is not prayer. We're not doing this because we want to feel good about ourselves or because we want to do the right thing. We're doing this to get the best possible outcome for our point of view out in the circumstances that actually exist in the real world. So I try to tell people, look, man, maybe you're not getting what you want. Maybe you think that you can vote for Harris or you can vote for Trump and they'll still send weapons to Israel and that upsets you, right? Look at where they are. There is differentiation in the nuances of their policies, right? And so your obligation, if you care about this issue, is to engage, if you can't win your victory outright, is to engage in harm reduction. to create the best possible outcome of the options available to you. And if you waste that moment to exercise that power, however small in the greater context that it is, you have failed in your obligation. If you think that something is right, you have an obligation to fight for it with every means at your disposal. And elections are a powerful way that A, you can maybe achieve some of what you want, and B, you can gauge where things are at in terms of the popularity of your viewpoints. But if you don't participate, if you boycott, you'll just never know, right? So you have to put yourself out there as a candidate. You have to put yourself out there as a voter. You have to be part of the process. Or, as Michael says, just not complain so much about it. But I think that's the wrong approach. I think the approach is you need to be in the game because the game is in you.
Thank you all. I love that a half hour in, we're already quoting Prussian military theorists.
You invited me.
I mean, this is such great information. All right, so my next question is, gosh, there's so many out there, and whoever wants to jump in with the first one can do so. But what's a common myth about voting that you're aware of and that you can dispel for us now?
Boy, I get to hear those myths every meeting, as does Scott Alberts at his. I think one of the myths that is circulating is that there's a lot of fraud in elections, and therefore it doesn't really matter what I do because there's so much fraud. I think it is really important for people to understand that while there is some fraud, there is, it is minuscule in the sense that in the 2020 election, for example, where there were 7 states that were considered swing states, they're still, I think, largely the same swing states today. There are only 455 documented cases of fraudulent votes. That's either double voting by the same person, somebody pretending to be somebody else, etc. There's 455 documented cases of fraud across 7 states where millions of votes were counted. It's less than a 1,000%, and it had no impact on the outcome of those elections. Where fraud is actually more likely to have an impact, and where it has potentially had an impact in some races, are in very small municipal races or very small committee races, which is a whole different thing, which we shouldn't bother getting into because reasonable minds can differ. But very small local races, the one Bernie Sanders running for mayor, mayor of Burlington, 10 votes. We had a case in Eddystone, was decided by 3 votes a few years ago, which a lot of us are quite familiar with. And in those cases, if there's fraud, I won't tell you it can't make a difference. It could. But the likelihood is that it's going to be caught. And people are prosecuted and sent to jail because of this. There's a guy who's going to jail right now in Philadelphia or Montgomery County or Florida. I don't know where he's going to actually wind up in jail because he tried to vote in all of those places. So fraud can happen, but its ability to actually impact an election is non-existent, except in very, very small elections where people pretty much know everybody who votes. And the likelihood of it being caught is much, much higher.
I think fraud is one of those big ones. Go ahead, Peggy.
I'm sorry. I had actually jumped ahead with the thing about the elections only happening every 4 years, but I want to kind of build on what Christine says, because we run into that a lot when we're out doing voter registration or voter education, people coming up to us and telling us about the fraud and how the elections are stolen. And what I always say to them is sign up to work the polls, because when you're working the polls, you'll see it's impossible. There's so many eyes on every step. It's virtually impossible for someone to commit fraud in an election. And I don't think they ever do, and maybe that's for the best. But um, like Christine says, it's actually an insult to the people who work the polls to think that someone could get away with something in an election, because the people who work the polls are so diligent.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if those of you who are listening gathered, what I studied in college was history. And one of the things I studied was the history of elections and how we run them. And little local history, one election we had in a committee race here was decided by a local council primary race was decided by a coin toss, right? This happens every year. There's some election that's decided by a game of chance because it's literally a tie. And the law provides for a random selection at that point between the two candidates. So every vote does count, going back to that point. But when it comes to fraud, right? I don't want to say it's impossible. I can come up with a strategy to fraudulently game any election system that's ever been employed throughout the history of humanity, because we know how they've done it. And they've done it through when it was not anonymous. They did it through vote buying, right? When it was done on these lever machines that people are so nostalgic about. If you have control of a polling place, and by that I mean you have everyone from one party in that polling place, but no one from another party, and you maybe control patronage jobs in that town, you can do something called ringing up, which is after the doors close, you sign a bunch of signatures, you cast a bunch of votes. Who's going to know, right? I mean, there's every system you can devise. Humans are not perfect. Our systems are not perfect. Every system that a human being can devise can be hacked. So our job is to create as much redundancy of checks and balances as possible to prevent it and minimize it. And as Christine says, the instances that we are aware of are de minimis. They do not affect the outcomes of elections, to the extent that we can tell in these small local elections, obviously. But all we can do is our level best to make sure that the people who are voting are qualified to vote, and that they are the person they say they are, and that they're only doing it one time in the one place that they're qualified to do it. So it's difficult. We have to spend a lot of money and put a lot of resources into, monitoring these things. We have extremely diligent staff working on this. We have bipartisan people watching each other. It's particularly funny to me knowing the partisan makeup of our staff, considering the past system of how they were hired, to think that you'd have to have hundreds of Republicans conspiring to help Democrats cheat in an election in Delaware County, right? It would be, I mean, when you look at the results, right? If there is widespread fraud, you cannot explain the results. That we would somehow, as Democrats, cheat to throw a presidential election statewide on such a massive scale, cover it up and hide it, but then somehow State Representative Martina White, a Republican in the city of Philadelphia, in a very competitive, arguably should be Democratic district, and somehow we would let her win. It's not even logically consistent, right? If we are so corrupt and so dedicated to cheating and stealing elections, why are we not doing it routinely and everywhere, right? And I think that it's not that it's impossible, it's that to do election fraud on a scale where it will matter and affect the outcome of an election, the amount of resources, time, and effort and energy you'd have to spend on that, and the amount of people that have to keep a secret, marshaling those resources in a different way would be a more successful way to win an election. It's not a good cost value proposition. So I think that's our job, is to make it not worth the time to try, and that's what we do.
Okay, one myth that I hear: dead people vote. And another myth is that 2020, the 2020 election was false and the numbers were wrong. And it's really funny because Stacey Garrity, who was the current treasurer, is complaining that the votes were wrong, but somehow she won.
This this myth is not necessarily is not about fraud, but one thing that a few of our partners have been dispelling for potential voters in Philadelphia is that, you know, in Pennsylvania, if you have a felony conviction, you can vote. And that is, it's challenging, and there's a lot of misinformation about it because in other states that's not the case. So it can be hard for, you know, people to understand that there are different voting laws in different states, and that something that could be true on the internet in one state is not necessarily true here, and that, you know, things change over time. But you know, it's been one of our media partners, We Talk Weekly, did an interview where they talked about where they had Kadita Kenner on, who dispelled this myth, and they actually, the hosts of the radio show were stopped on the street by somebody who had a felony conviction, and he thanked them. He said, I didn't know that I could vote, and I am so happy that, you know, I can go vote now. So that's a really powerful myth to dispel, because a lot of goes back to the importance of voting. And somebody else on another panel at one of the events that we supported made a really good point, which is that some bad actors spend millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars to try to disenfranchise voters. And so if your vote didn't matter, they wouldn't be spending millions of dollars to try to get you not to vote. So trust me, your vote matters. And if you have a felony conviction, please vote.
Yeah, I think that there is a caveat. If you have a felony conviction, you can't be in prison. You know, you have
Yes,
to
thank you. Thank
your
you for making
sentence.
that clear. Yes,
Right.
thank you.
So, but you know, one of the things the county does is we actually have a lot of people who are incarcerated at George W. Hill, whether they're awaiting trial and haven't been convicted of anything, or they're there on a sentence that may be a high class misdemeanor. They are able to vote. And one of the things that the county is actually pretty good at is letting them know they have the right to vote and facilitating their ability to vote by mail so that they are not disenfranchised because they they are legally entitled to vote despite the fact that they are, you know, in the criminal justice system and incarcerated. So that's important to know. But I think one of the other myths that's out there that I want to dispel, because I keep hearing about it, and it kind of goes to the same inconsistency of Treasurer Garrity suggesting that there was fraud in one race on her ballot, but not in her race because she won, is that that it would be more accurate to count votes by hand. And there's a problem. And I also get numerous requests by email every week to use paper ballots, which is really funny because Delaware County, for the first time in my lifetime, went to paper ballots for anybody who wasn't voting absentee in 2020. And since then, every vote cast in Delaware County has been cast on paper. And those votes are those paper ballots are retained. We have had numerous recounts, and all of those recounts have shown that the machine counts are accurate. And so it's striking to me when there's been peer-reviewed studies, and I have them and I can share them, that have actually, you know, empirically demonstrated that machine counts are more accurate. And there is one particular person who comes to every meeting of ours who goes off for extent, you know, or 3 minutes, talking about problems with voting machines. All of her problems that she has cited predate having paper records of machines. And while there has been one instance in Pennsylvania where a machine machines were in certain precincts in Northampton County involving a judicial race were improperly coded. So they hadn't done sufficient testing of their machines. They tested some of them, but not all of them, before they were deployed for the election. And some of those machines did not accurately reflect how the votes were cast in one race. Well, it was identified as a problem pretty early on in the election, because a person who knew that they had voted went in and found that there were, I guess it was early in the process of counting the votes, realized that there were no votes in her home precinct for her, which meant something was wrong because she knew she'd voted for herself. That problem was solved. They recounted the paper ballots. They ran them through machines that had been tested, and they were able to get an accurate tally. It took a little longer, but the problem was identified and fixed. And so I think and it was fixed in time for them to certify the election, even though it was a countywide election. It all worked out just the way it was supposed to.
Mm-hmm.
I think people need to realize when they hear this, a lot of times they're hearing it from people who have an agenda. And that agenda is to call into question the security or the accuracy of the election.
Mm-hmm.
They are actually attempting to undermine the faith of the public in the outcome of the elections. They are not directly looking at the process and seeing it as a whole and what the stopgaps are to validate the outcome. And I think people need to understand that the accuracy of the election doesn't depend on whether you like the outcome or not. I have been an active participant in elections where I have not liked the outcome.
Mm-hmm.
But I can tell you, I have a lot of faith in how the process works.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a lot of faith in the fact that if I lost or if my candidate lost those elections, that's exactly what happened.
You know, one of the things when I run into those crazy, you should count the votes manually people, I always ask them, well, do you want your bank to hand count your money? Because there's a lot more human error in human counting than there is in machine counting. The other thing I want to take a little credit, because the league actually went into George Hill and we trained the case managers there on how to sign the residents up for mail-in ballots. And we also, and we did this in nursing homes too, we also helped them work out a process that's in line with the non-vote harvesting part of Act 77, so that we make sure there's a process where nobody's going down the hallway and collecting the ballots the mail-in ballots and putting them in the mail. We make sure there's a process where each resident of George Hill or of a nursing home can mail their own ballot. So that's something we do if anybody needs any help in that area.
Just to touch on both those things, in 37 states, I believe, it would be perfectly legal to walk through the nursing home, collect everyone's ballots that they completed, and do them a kindness by taking their ballots to the mail for them.
Mm-hmm.
People call that ballot harvesting, right?
Right.
There's no actual election fraud issue with that. That is simply providing a service to help people get their votes in. But going back to the example in Northampton County with that machine where we were able to, actually figure out what the result was after a failure, that's only possible in the system we have now. I remember I think they were Danaher touch screens we had previous to this. We would have catastrophic failures on a machine, and guess what? Those machines simply were awash. We couldn't count any votes from those machines. They were just simply, this precinct returned no results in this election. The lever machines that everyone's so nostalgic about. You click that lever, you pull the thing, you get a ka-chunk and the curtain opens. I love those machines. They're a lot of fun. They're very tactile. And when they break, we had one poll in Upper Darby where everyone was voting. The chunk was happening. It felt very satisfying. Everyone felt like their vote was counted. But the little tooth that was supposed to engage the gears that turn the actual counts, the master one that, like the clutch, if you will, was not deploying. And so no votes were actually being recorded. So again, an entire machine, an entire precinct whose votes did not count, and that we had no way to go back and recover. Now we have this paper trail, right? We have these paper ballots. And so we can go back if we have a catastrophic failure of a machine. If push comes to shove, we can in fact open the boxes and hand count the ballots.
But more importantly, they can continue voting.
More importantly, they can continue
using
voting.
the paper ballots. And then and then when the thing is fixed, we can feed them in and get them into the system.
But also to the point where routinely the advocates who claim that these elections are fraudulent, that there's something wrong with our voting system as we have it, they want to go back to these hand-counted paper ballots. The most fraudulent elections in history have all taken place using hand-counted paper ballots. The 1927 Liberian general election, there were 230,000 votes for one candidate, 9,000 votes for another candidate. There were 15,000 registered voters. Those ballots were all hand-counted. Every election in the Soviet Union, hand-counted paper ballots. So, I mean, if you think boxes of hand-counted paper ballots being passed around from place to place are somehow more secure than a clear chain of custody that's scanned through a digital machine, verified in another digital machine, and then if you need to verify it by hand counting, you think that's less secure than a system of people hand counting paper ballots, we're going to have to disagree.
Hey, Scott, they want to take it back to the days of Plunkett from Tammany Hall. That's where they want to go. Doesn't work.
Well, and this is why we have the anonymous voting. This is another myth, actually. People think we have the secret ballot to protect your right to privacy. The state, our government, our system does not care about your right to privacy in the matter of an election. The fact that you voted, who you are, what party you're registered, all that's public record. The only reason why your ballot was made secret, we call it the Australian ballot, because that's where the trend started, was not to prevent your privacy, although it does do that. It was to prevent you from selling your vote. So if in the 1800s, you could walk in, declare your vote, show it to the person who was there. They were like, okay, yeah, he voted the way he said he would. You'd leave the poll and someone would hand you, whatever, $10, whatever it was. Before that, when people would gather in the town square and like the Iowa caucus, right? Iowa caucus is very problematic. You'd stand on one side of the room for one candidate, one side of the room for the other candidate, or you'd all raise your hands. Someone would be there to count the things and we'll make sure they get paid, or we'll make sure that guy gets fired from his city job, right? It was to prevent other outside forces from manipulating a democratic process through threats of intimidation or more commonly offers to buy the vote. Now, by the way, when we didn't have the secret ballot and vote buying was common, we had the highest rates of voter participation this country has ever seen, man. We had 90 to 99% turnout in some of these places. In some of those cases, it may have been the same person voting 3 times. But when you have a lot of working class people struggling to make ends meet and you're offering them a week's wage to show up and cast a vote for a candidate that you tell them to vote for, you're going to get a lot of people saying yes to that. But we don't do that anymore. So that's why we have the secret ballot.
There's a lot of myths that exist about voting. So I encourage anyone who's tuning in to do some research on that. If there's other myths that our panelists think of that you want to put in the chat as we continue to talk, we will share that information with viewers as well. I kind of want to combine our next couple questions into one. So what are barriers people face when it comes to voting? And then how can we dismantle these barriers to ensure that everyone feels, capable of voting and safe to vote?
One of the things I find is that realistically, there are people that won't be able to get to vote because of transportation. Okay, major problem we run into in some of the cities, specifically in Philadelphia. How do we get those people actually to the polls? They like to participate in the process. In addition to that, we've got a number of people that are disabled, handicapped. How do they get to the vote and how do they participate in the process? Extremely important. Myself personally, I deal with a lot of disinformation and social media that's spreading all kind of rumors that want to suppress the vote. There's strategies that certain people have used called deterrent strategies to put so much bad information into the ether, so people decide that they're so frustrated they will not vote at all. And so those are some of the barriers we're dealing with. And now we've got AI, which basically goes and will take information and a voice and a face and could fake as though anybody's speaking. So these are some of the barriers we're dealing with.
Mm-hmm. Within Pennsylvania, I have to say that if you think about voting in PA now versus about 10 years ago, we've eliminated so many barriers in the process. You don't have to stand in line at 7 a.m. in the morning to vote before you go to work. People do still do it because they want that experience, but you don't have to. You don't have to rush home from work to get there before the polls close. You can vote by mail. Everybody can vote by mail. You can register to vote, change your registration, request a mail-in ballot. All this stuff is online now. And you can find out where your polling place is if you choose to go in person to vote. There aren't a lot of barriers left in the Pennsylvania process. But one that's left is our closed primary system. We're one of only 10 states that have totally closed primary. So you have to either be registered Republican or Democrat to vote. I personally would like to see unaffiliated voters or independent voters be able to walk in and say, okay, I'm Republican for the day, and let them vote in that primary. I posted several websites in the chat, and I'm going to provide them to Jen so that she can put them in the email that comes out afterward. There are several really good nonpartisan sites where you can go and research candidates. They even allow you to drill down to who's on your local ballot. One is the leagues, it's Vote 411. One is the Committee of 70, which used to focus on Pennsylvania or on Philadelphia, but now they've expanded out to the suburbs. And the other is Ballotopedia. And all of them are nonpartisan. All of them allow you to research who's on your ballot and compare and contrast the candidates in each position. So it's really important that people educate themselves on who aligns with them and vote for that person.
I think that, you know, a lot of what we were talking about falls under the umbrella of a barrier for me, which is, you know, not having a culture of civic participation. And that's something that I think Every Voice, Every Vote is really focused on in 2024, 2025 is the everyday, you know, civic participation that can happen. And so, you know, I think to get over that barrier, you know, is to, again, a lot of voter education, civics education can happen. But, you know, what people can do as individuals is every time that they say, oh man, our taxes are too high, right? Or, oh, I wish our schools were better, you know, is perfectly fine to complain. But then ask yourself or Google, who's in charge of that, right? Who's in charge? Or think, or, you know, say out loud, you know, I can't wait to vote, you know, the next time this issue is up for election or on the ballot. You know, so trying to, every time there's, you know, something in your life that you feel like you want to change, something in your community that you want to change, you know, instead of only complaining about it, you know, ask that question, who's in charge here? And find the answer. And then ask, when's the next time I get to vote about this issue? And I think the more that we say those things out loud to people in our families and people in our communities, the more that it becomes really clear, you know, that there are systems that, you know, control a lot of our lives that we do have the power to influence, and that we have the right and responsibility to do so. So that's, you know, a lot of what Every Voice, Every Vote is working on in this next year and a half is focusing again on that culture of civic participation and that feeling of accountability that, you know, people can have to their communities.
When it comes to cultural change, oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, no, I was just going to say that I think that transportation is an issue. I think but I think probably the single biggest barrier is information. And it speaks to what both Peggy and Kristen were talking about. Information about where to vote, how to vote, making sure that it's accurate. Not everybody has the same access. Some people who are citizens still are not necessarily fluent in English, making sure that they've got the materials that allow them to exercise their rights as a citizen in a language where they can fully comprehend what's on the ballot and how to access the ballot. People with disabilities, again, making sure that they understand what their opportunities are to access the ballot, what help they're entitled to vote. And I think making it clear that people have good information. One thing that is not a myth is currently in the state of Pennsylvania, when no excuse mail-in voting was adopted, it sort of adopted wholesale a lot of the rules that applied to absentee ballots. And there were a lot of things that were legacies of decades ago when the state of Pennsylvania last really did a thorough updating of its election code, and things that really aren't applicable today, or as much of a concern. And they have become, in certain instances, depending on what the status is of the court cases at the moment, really issues and potential barriers as to whether an individual's ballot can be counted under the law. Not whether it should be, but whether it legally can be. And I will tell you, in Delaware County, we're going to follow the law. And if there's a court decision that says X, whether we agree with X or not, if that's what the courts say, that's what we're going to do. So, we'll appeal it, but it may or may not affect the outcome of the election. So having good information about how to make sure your vote by mail counts, which is a thing that has really assisted a lot of people. My husband works very strange hours in an emergency department, and if his shift runs long, he can't get home to vote, so he votes by mail. If he does that, I want to make sure that he always asks me to check his ballot, not how he's voted, because, like I said, I think he voted for me, but really more, just to make sure, did I sign it in the right place? Did I put the right date? Did I, do I need to make sure it's in this envelope? There's a lot of things that people may not have access to information, and not everybody is on the internet or knows where to go. Some of that's on us. Some of that's on us as the county and the party that runs the elections to give people information. I put in the chat probably the best site to access here in the county that will bridge you to many other sites and provide a lot of really great resources about how to do things. Gives you locations about where drop boxes are, so you don't have to risk something going into the mail and maybe getting lost or stolen there. And it's important that we push that information out, but it is part of the citizenship and the civic engagement that people take some responsibility for getting that information. And I know when I sometimes feel like I'm ancient. I don't know about you, Peggy or Scott, but and Michael, you guys look like you're a little closer to my age than Kristen and Jennifer are. But we did have a social studies class in high school that spent a lot of time on civics, basic civics, how government works. I am in a position where people come in every public meeting and complain to us about things that are not the responsibility of county government. There is literally nothing I can do. And yet I have to sit there and listen to this. And when I try to tell them this isn't something where I've got control, the insistence is that, well, we pass an ordinance. And I said, well, I don't have the authority under state law to pass that ordinance. I don't have the authority under federal law to pass that ordinance. I can't enforce that ordinance. People do not understand the basic levels of government.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's unfortunate. I don't know how we change that. I don't think that's something we can change at the county level, but it's part of a larger discussion than just voting, but making sure that we do, when it comes to voting, it is incumbent on me as an elected official at the county level to make sure that the information is available, that it's accurate, that we've done everything we can to push it out. We need to rely on people exercising their obligations as citizens to go access that.
I wanted to say two things. One, in terms of civics, something that I've been sponsoring recently and posting. I don't know if you've seen Schoolhouse Rock. I'm just a bill. I'm only a bill till I get out of Little Hill. I just posted it again to educate people to understand the process of why voting is important and what actually happens. In
Mhm.
addition to that, in terms of mail-in ballots, I'll share a story with you. Um, I ran a campaign in 2022, and I reached out and contacted ward leaders in a certain city, and they were explaining to me that they really don't care about mail-in ballots because they want to do, and they see that voting is a cultural process, and so they encourage their community to come out and culturally actually vote. And I think what we really have to do is try to educate them, to explain to them that the democratic process, and it'll allow their people to actually be more proficient, not actually coming. So that's going to have to change eventually, because souls to the polls and those things make sense in the old days before you had Act 77. Now, I think we need to make that transition and educate people of the importance of how we do that.
Mhm.
And
Oh.
I just, oh,
Hey, Kristen.
I was just going to follow up and bring hopefully a little optimism to after Christine's great comment about, you know, just how important it is to be informed, and, you know, just to paint a broader picture of what Every Voice, Every Vote is doing, you know, this season, and we have been doing for the past 2 years, is we work with media partners in Philadelphia, as well as community organizations, nonprofits, and social media creators. And, you know, our media really takes the lead on like in-depth reporting about issues, you know, documenting like how the systems are working, you know, and what are the levers of power that are in play here. And our community organizations are doing really amazing work as trusted messengers and getting into their communities with the kind of really, you know, important basic voting information, as well as our social media creators, who are also trusted messengers for, you know, the younger generations who do really need to, you know, become acculturated into our democracy and this process. And so, you know, we've just been really excited to be able to support the work that our partners are doing and kind of beef up, you know, the amount of information that is spread throughout Philadelphia, creating partnerships where, you know, reporting and voter resources created by one partner are then, like say Committee of 70, are then translated by our other partner into various other languages. And so right now we have about, I think, 13 to 15, you know, different languages that our partners are translating work into. And so, you know, I just want to emphasize that, you know, we hear you, Christine, and we are with you. And, you know, the good quality information is the backbone. And we are trying to, you know, empower the trusted messengers in the communities in Philadelphia to really kind of organically spread the word about how people can participate in democracy.
Mhm.
Scott, I know I cut you off, so let's give it to
So
you.
I was just the bear. Ironically, the barrier I see that is what inspired me to really say yes to this appointment and get involved in this work is election day itself. The concept of it, the fact that we have an election day, the fact that we have in-person precinct voting run by people who do it twice a year, who are in theory elected, right? And then they appoint an assistant. Um, they're effectively amateurs, right? They're volunteers. They get paid a stipend to work on those days. It relies on, you know, heroic efforts by engaged citizens to participate, working more than a full work day, right? I mean, they get in there, they're in there at 6 a.m. and they're not leaving often until 9 o'clock at night.
9.
Some people are there till 10, right? I mean, we had a woman who claimed she was there at midnight, despite the fact that her materials were dropped off at 9:30. So, you know, people exaggerate too. But in 2008, I live in a part of Upper Darby Township that's predominantly, I'm a minority where I live. It's predominantly people of color, immigrants from other countries, African-American folks, working class people, people who, you know, all the polling and results would indicate might vote for a candidate in 2008 that might have been appealing to their sense of history. This is a presidential election. one of the busiest polls in my ward, we call them districts in Upper Darby, did not open until I think 12:15, because the person whose job it was to open that poll, person in the community, the judge of elections, was sick and didn't show up and wouldn't answer her phone, wouldn't answer her door. The then Board of Elections was not particularly motivated to solve this problem. They just had a sheriff standing there with replacement materials, lazily waiting for someone to volunteer to, I mean, someone from the community would have to step up, and they were planning to go to work that day, but now they have to change their plans and work a polling place. So several people did it as like a tag team starting at 12:15 before we had one person who took it for the rest of the day. That's a fragile system, right? This is not a resilient system. It's not a system that makes sense in a world where most families, everyone has to work, right? This is not a housewife culture that of the 1950s that, where we have these people who, oh, my children are raised and now I'm going to go volunteer, which is, I mean, this is, when you talk to old decision makers, this is the way they thought about policy, right? That this is the backbone of American democracy.
Or businesses in the area like Scott Paper and Boeing and other places would say to their executives or their foremen or whatever, you should do this. You've got the day off to go work in the polls and be a judge of elections. That's why my father was a judge of elections.
Right. And then of course, you had patronage politics and people, I mean, we now no longer allow them to work inside the polls. But if you look at one of the party's bylaws, it would say like public employees are not allowed to work inside the polls, but their wives and children sure can. And so you relied on either corruption or an availability of a workforce that simply isn't available anymore. And it's a fragile system that I worry about every time. Now, we do this Herculean effort to make sure that doesn't happen. We now have a full-time person, working year-round to recruit, train, and fill these spots with people from the Democratic and Republican parties in every precinct. But we still run into problems. Right now, we have polls that are not fully staffed, right? That we're working to try to fill the gaps. I have friends in the West Coast and a family in Seattle and friends in Oregon, and they think we're crazy. Why do you still vote in person? What are you doing? They haven't done that. They haven't done what we do in more than 2 decades. What they do is everything's vote by mail. And if you want to vote in person, there are voter service centers staffed by civil servants who are trained and professional, cameras, watchful eyes, from both parties, making sure everything's being done according to Hoyle. But everyone prefers that. They have great vote rates of voter participation. Once they get used to it, why not make voting convenient? Why make it happen on only one magic day? Right? Why rely on a fragile system of effectively volunteer labor that could break and disenfranchise, everyone in that neighborhood who was going to vote that morning in 2008, they were on their way to work. They're going to go work a double shift somewhere. They didn't get to vote that year, right? That's the result of this system. And it's a bad system and we need to change it, and it has to happen at the state government level. And so that's why I preach this gospel wherever I go, because you all are represented by state representatives and state senators. I want this in the discourse. I want you thinking about this. And we really do need a comprehensive reform of our election code.
Well, I know we're in the last 15 minutes of our time together today. Although if I could have it my way, I'd keep you all for many hours to talk more about all of this. All of the resources and links that are in the chats we'll share when we post the recording of this panel. So if there's any that you want to add. So I guess I'm going to jump to a last question and ask, let's limit our responses to like a minute. But what else is important for us to share with the general public about voting? What do we need to make sure we impart to viewers?
Are we frozen? Okay.
I think there's this episode of The West Wing where the president is talking to a bunch of students and he says something that he quotes Woody Allen, although I don't think Woody Allen was the actual originator of the quote, which is decisions are made by people who show up. And the most important thing is to show up. And if you don't take the step of showing up to register to vote or showing up to vote, then you've elected to disenfranchise yourself. I mean, I'm assuming this is a person who is in fact a United States citizen of at least 18 years of age on election day. Because if you are, then you are eligible. You are an eligible voter, and you're not a felon currently incarcerated in Pennsylvania. You're an eligible voter, and you should register to vote and cast your vote, because if you don't do that, you are choosing to not be part of the decision-making process. And I think we all know there are some people out there who don't have time, don't have the bandwidth in their lives to feel like they should be part of the process. They're too busy figuring out where they've got to be that evening, whether they can feed their kids, getting to a doctor's appointment. The act of voting seems just like it's one thing too much. But those are the very people who are most likely to need services or access to something that the government touches on. And if you do not choose to vote, you have no say in what services are available. And, I hear you about making sure that everybody gets to the detailed information about the candidates. And that is great for the people who have the time to do it. But as Kristen was saying, there's a lot of trusted sources out there. And those trusted sources are going to be different for every person. It might be your church community. It might be your synagogue or your mosque. It might be your family. It might be your neighbor who you've always relied on for good advice, or an older sibling. I mean, it might be a coworker. I get lots of calls from people in my community because they're used to seeing me at the polls. I'm sure that's true for Scott too. People who just know us and say, I don't know anything about this race. Who should I vote for? They're trusting somebody to give them good advice. And, I don't, who that person is going to be different for everybody. But I can tell you, if you don't take the step of showing up and casting your vote, you are disenfranchising yourself.
I just like to point out that the league is willing and able to go into high schools and junior colleges or colleges to do a mini civics lesson. We do in an hour or two what they should have had in high school over a semester. Register people to vote, get them signed up for mail-in ballots. We have an ongoing relationship with Delaware County. And last year we started with Williamson. We've been into Chester Charter, Southeast Delco, and Upper Darby, but we would love to be invited into other schools. It's difficult because people don't understand that we are nonpartisan. We're not going to sell one party over the other. We just want to educate voters and get them signed up. The other point I want to make is I'm a judge of elections in a precinct in Upper Darby. And we have a lot of new voters, a lot of new citizen voters. We have people who haven't voted in years. And they come in and they're really anxious because everything's different. Everything's changed from the last time they voted. We're not just there to run the polls. We're there to help you navigate the process. And we would love to help you not be intimidated when you walk in. There are new machines, there's new ways to cast votes, but we want to make you feel at home, get you voted, and get you on your way.
I want to talk about the one thing I would add, I like to talk to people about is thinking strategically when you vote. Don't think about how it makes you feel or whether you like the person or what the moral implications of voting for this person or that person are. You're voting to make a decision for your community that is the best of the available decisions. And one way to think about it, for example, is an executive position like a mayor or a governor versus a legislative position where people are joining a body, right? So city council, state representative, Congress. You might want to take a different approach when you're looking at how you vote in those races, right? When you're voting for an executive who wields individual authority, then the character and capabilities and philosophy of that individual really do matter a great deal. When you're voting for someone who's going to join a legislative body, usually as a junior member, or it almost doesn't matter if what that person's individual traits are, assuming they're a reasonably decent character, right? They're not a monster. it really comes down to what team they're on, because the most important vote that person's going to cast is on their first day of office. They're going to elect a leader of their body, whether it be a Speaker of the House or whatever they call it in the various bodies. And that person is going to determine what that legislative body does for the next 2 years or 4 years, depending on which level of government we're talking about here. And that vote, they could vote almost, it doesn't matter how they're going to vote on every other issue. If they're saying they're going to vote for issues that will never come to the floor because of the person they elect to be chair, it's irrelevant how they're going to vote on these issues because it'll never come before them. So you have to remember that politics is a team sport. And so you have to think strategically and comprehensively, what office am I voting for? Is it more important for the party that I affiliate with to have control of that body? Or is it more important for me to not vote for this guy because I don't like him? Right? And with an executive, similarly, is it more important that this person is a member of my party? Or do I trust that individual to make good, sound decisions and exercise discretion in a way that I'm comfortable with? So these are different kinds of offices, and the way you think about them, you should really, as you're taking advantage of all those great resources that Peggy was mentioning about, when you get information on candidates, use that in a way that is thoughtful and remove your emotions from it to the best of your ability, because then you'll make a better decision that you'll be happier with in the long run.
I like to say that it's extremely important for all the things that everybody said, but I think we have to get to a point where we educate people that voting is every 6 months, because it's just not every 4 years. And we got to get to a point where people understand on a regular basis and get through understanding, practicing every 6 months to do the research and actually take the opportunity to actually don't turn off the TV, do some research, talk to people that you trust in your community. Please leave Pookie alone on the corner that doesn't know anything, but only talk to the right folks to make a decision. But we have to get to a point where we vote every 6 months, and every vote counts. I ran a campaign I forget, like 10, 12 years ago for mayor. The guy won by one vote, Joe Capizolo. One vote. So every vote counts and it matters. So every 6 months and every vote matters.
I just want to piggyback off of what Mike and Christine said, which was, talk to your community, be vocal about what you care about, be in conversation with people that you trust and get their opinions and their feedback. Also, engage politely, maybe in people who you don't agree with, but make sure that, you use your voice, and you engage in conversation. Through those conversations, you can learn about, your friend, your family member, but also it's the way to start filtering in and understanding the broader systems at play, and a way of expanding your understanding of, what's at stake and how the political system works. So keep talking to your community members about what you care about, and then make sure that you tie that back to voting. Like Mike said, every 6 months, those conversations about schools, about your taxes, about your healthcare options, make sure that when you're talking to folks that you try to figure out, well, when's the next time we get to vote on that.
Yeah, and I Kristen, you just said something which triggered a thought, and it's something that as an organizer, I know that we've been taught, and that is, you really do want to go out. If you're evangelizing for people to vote, whatever their interests are, whatever their party is, voting, it's in Pennsylvania, it really should be a habit. It should be something you expect to do twice a year, every year. And every now and then you're going to miss it, and you're going to realize there's nothing too exciting on the ballot. I'm sort of indifferent about this, and I really need the sunshine down in Florida, so I'm going to go take that trip and miss election day, and I forgot to get a ballot. That does happen, but if it's a habit, if it's something you expect to do every 6 months, you're going to do it. And so I strongly encourage people, to Peggy's point about people think they only vote every 4 years, get into the habit of voting. And the other thing that does for you is campaigns and political parties. This is all campaigns and all political parties. they do have everybody's voter history, and they communicate with some voters more than others. And if you really want to get substantive information, if you want to have a choice in primaries, whichever party you're in, when you're that super voter, sorry, there I go. I got both super voter who votes in every election, you're going to be getting all of the mail from the candidates. And if all you're going to be getting information from them. So if you want to be more informed, get on that list. The best way to get on those lists is to make sure you're voting in every election.
Mhm.
And it doesn't
And
matter
thank
which
you.
party you are. Doesn't matter.
And thank you for what you put in the chat too. The Child Guidance Resource Centers works mainly with youth. So there might be questions about, how old do I have to be to register to vote? So thank you, Christine, for noting that if you're going to turn 18 before or even on election day, if your birthday's on election day, you can still register to vote and vote in that election if you are 18.
And Jen, we would be
By
happy to come in and do registration.
all right, we'll put you in touch with Jerry. Look at and also for adding, Peggy, that if you're 17, you can work and get paid on election day. So these are great opportunities to get young people involved.
And
All right. So Scott,
resource,
did you want to add something real quick? Yeah.
I just want to thank them, both Christine and Peggy, for posting all the resources I was going to
Yeah.
post.
That's one of the big things we do now, since everybody's registered, is we recruit poll workers.
Yeah, all these resources are amazing, and we'll share them widely, and we encourage all of you to share them widely too. So thank you on behalf of myself and Child Guidance Resource Centers to our wonderful panelists, and thank you to all of our viewers watching live or watching this later. We seek to host discussions that focus on important issues like this throughout the year, and we hope you'll join us again, and we absolutely hope that you vote. So thank you and have a great day, everyone.
Bye. Thank you,
Thank you
Jennifer.
for hosting this, and thank you all for listening.
Thank you all. Have a good day.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thanks for allowing